Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm your host Anna Heslop, and today our guest is FAR's Abie Horrocks. Abie is a senior environmental researcher at FAR, and at the ARIA Field Day recently she shared a presentation with grower Peter Mitchell on how to extend the value that you can get from a ryegrass seed crop. So we'll start asking Abie why.
Right. So the primary motivation was around herbicide resistance and looking at ways to remove, especially that post-emergent herbicide, which is showing signs of resistance. And it's not uncommon to utilise that regrowth from the ryegrass. It's a way to any seed that you've lost at harvest can be grown and value being taken from it with feed. And but what we were also looking at was getting a nitrogen portion into that as well with a legume, and then also being motivated primarily around reducing fertilizer spend on nitrogen for the subsequent crop, and just looking at ways to see how that can go with drilling it into the ryegrass.
Okay, so there's two things there. There's increasing the value or extending the value, and also reducing some of the associated costs.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so what exactly are those alternatives that you're looking at?
So as I said, not unusual to let that ryegrass regrow and go into a spring crop other than as opposed to an autumn crop. But yes, it was a bit novel to try and get the legume in as well. We had two trials, which we'll talk about, looking at favour and some of the smaller seeded legumes with a few different conditions around that might affect the establishment. So that's just in terms of the rotation. The options will depend on what is grown. Like if you're having a white clover seed crop, then white clover probably wouldn't be your choice. So there's a few moving parts around choice, but there's a bunch of options out there.
And so the benefit of adding legumes, how does that work?
So this is really just capitalising on that free end that the legume will fix. And then factoring that in to the fertiliser decisions for your subsequent crop. Also quality, so feed quality is a part of that, increasing protein and improving the quality of the feeds. And I guess the main message around the benefit from the legume is making sure you do that soil testing, because the nitrogen generated, there'll be a lot of that N will be available for that next crop, but then there's going to be further N released as that residue decomposes. So testing for mineral N, but also looking at your potentially mineralizable N, what will become available later as it decomposes, are two really important measurements to take if you're going to be trying to get the most value and reduce that spend with the legume. And a quick plug for GLC's N calculator. It's just a fantastic tool to pop in those numbers from the lab, and it will estimate based on how much nitrogen your crop needs, how you can reduce that fertilizer spend. And if you want to get the most value out of it, then that's the approach to take.
So when would that soil testing be taking?
So you probably want to do that before the spring crop goes in, and just to see what's immediately available for that crop. And the PMN test can be taken any time, but you'll take it then as well, and that will factor in what will become available over the subsequent month, the growing season.
So if I get this right, there have been two different trials. What were the two trials and how did they differ?
Yes. So we've got the long-term Chertsey establishment trial, which is in its 21st year now, and that had a ryegrass seed crop that was harvested end of January, beginning of Feb. And that trial is focusing on the min-till, no-till and full cultivation treatments with irrigation and without irrigation. We're tracking soil quality and production, and so this was an opportunity to come in with the faba beans, which we used at this trial at around 60 kgs per hectare. Over-drilled that at the beginning of March, and then that was grazed by dairy calves end of April, and we just tracked the biomass. And the question there was really Can we get the faba beans established? Does establishment methods have any impact on those results? But there was another trial at Kōwhai Farm where we were more interested in a range of legumes. So we had small-seeded legumes there. That trial wasn't grazed, but we were looking at the small-seeded Bursine, Balanza, and Vetch, and then also the larger faba. Neither of the trials had any fertilizer applied, and it's not to say you wouldn't do that, but we were just interested also to see what sort of yields would get without fertilizer. And that trial at Kōwhai was more focused on quality, the quality of the feed.
Okay. So did you find that those different establishment methods, so we're talking about the 3 min-till, no-till and full cultivation,
Yes.
And did you find that those establishment methods had a difference in the results?
Yes, they did. So when we went in to drill the faba beans, it was very dry, and it was clearly more problematic to get to the desired seed depth and the dryland reps and the no-till. And then that bed witness throughout with the results. So we also looked at penetrometer readings, which measure the firmness of the soil, and they were significantly firmer with the dryland and the no-till. So with those results, the faba success was affected. It was lower in the drylands, and 3 months after grazing, we had about 22% of the sward faba and no-till compared to, say, 45 in the full cultivation. So it just, so that did have an effect.
And so that was a seasonal thing
Very
much
so.
as anything else?
Very much so.
So it makes it really hard to say there's a good or bad way of doing things, doesn't it?
It just means that you need to take into account conditions when you're choosing your legume, and that was a very strong result from both of these trials.
And so were there any other differences?
So the yields were pretty similar across treatments in terms of the ryegrass and the faba. It was just that sward ratio that differed. But where there was more faba, there was better quality and the feeds. And at Kōwhai Farm, we had 0 establishment with the small seeds, and this was because we went in a bit late. It was more early April that was drilled. So lesson there that if you've already got quite a lot of regrowth with the ryegrass, those smaller seeds just can't compete. The faba beans did well, and the results from that trial were we got about 2.5 tons from, there was an annual and a perennial ryegrass, I should say, at that trial. So we had a with and without the legume. And we got significantly greater yields where the legume was added. So it was around 2.5 tons for the annual ryegrass and an extra 1/4 ton with the legume. And for the perennial, it was around 3.2 ton and an extra half with the legume. So that increased the yield, increased the quality, the crude protein significantly higher where there was a legume. No surprises there.
I was going to ask you, how did you measure and define that quality?
Yeah, we're using crude protein measurements for that. And take homes from that is if you're going in a bit late or there already is a bit of regrowth, you're going to be wanting to use a bigger seed. But if you've got really firm, dry conditions, then that's going to provide some obstacles. So it's just really making the decision based on the conditions at the time.
What impact did all of this have on that regrowth and stock feed? So
the main impact was quality of the feeds, increase actual biomass. At the Kōwhai Farm, where we had a control with and without. At the Chertsey trial, the whole trial got the faba beans, so we can't draw that conclusion. But the firmness conditions are going to affect establishment. It's not to say there wasn't establishment in the dryland or the no-till. It was just lower. So the biggest bang for your buck if you're trying to factor in that nitrogen into the next crop is you probably do want to get more of it established as possible.
Okay, and what about the impact on nitrogen though? Because that was a real key driver for the project.
It was. So that's what we need to do now, and this sort of leaning into where to from here, as always, these things bring up more questions. It would be to have a longer term trial. Both of these were short little look-see trials. We need to, if there's enough interest in this, extend it out so that we can actually crunch the numbers across a longer period of time where you might be comparing a spring cereal compared to an autumn cereal, there'll be less yield when you're going in later in that spring. But then can that be offset by the savings in nitrogen, fertilizer, and any earnings from the actual biomass? And then we can actually have a better look at how that nitrogen can supply the into that next crop. So that just requires a bit of a longer term trial. We had really low soil N at the Chertsey site, but we didn't apply fertilizer, and we still got around 2,000 kgs of dry matter at the point of grazing, and then another 2,000 post grazing. So we still got a lot of above ground biomass purely just from the legume. I think it would be worthwhile getting a better handle on how much fertilizer could you apply to maximise that yield without compromising the functionality of the legume. So there's a few questions there about further extending the value to maximise the above ground.
And are there any growers out there that are already doing this?
Well, there's certainly growers already utilising that regrowth. Adding that legume, I would say less so, but there's definitely interest as fertiliser prices continue to fluctuate, but certainly going up. Then this is an opportunity to really reduce that spend, and there is interest in ways to do that. And the N from the legume is free. So factoring that in, looking for opportunities in the rotation to do that is something that I think is growing interest.
So we've touched on a few of them, but what would be your future plans for the work?
Yes, have touched on a few of them. A couple that I would add. One is how do we get the smaller seeds established earlier? There's certainly interest in perhaps oversowing or getting it in prior to the ryegrass harvest. So fleshing that out would be of interest. Haven't mentioned it, but soil quality is a big part of this narrative. Ryegrass is often, it's a restorative crop in the rotation, and this is an opportunity to extend that restorative period out. And it would be good to actually crunch some numbers around what that looks like with in terms of the soil quality part of the conversation.
So watch this space.
Watch this space.
Thanks very much, Abie, and all of you listeners that are growing ryegrass seed crops. I know many of you are bringing lambs and other things onto them after, but have a think about how those legumes could work as well. And have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.